Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Portia Ali Turco. So I'm a newly minted doctor, so I'm still getting used to the doctor piece. I'm an alum, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions too and talking about my process in dissertation.
Okay, so I am Dr. Cluna, and I'm also getting used to the doctor. I really go by Vero everywhere. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing my experience and answering any questions, and yeah, let's see what happens.
So we're going to start off with some questions for the faculty, and then we'll do some questions for the alumni, and then we'll open it up for the whole panel to answer a few of the questions as well. So I will start with Dr. McCullen since Dr. Hatfield's coughing. What is the general process for a dissertation from start to finish, and what does that process look like in a 3-month or 3-semester process?
Oh, that's a nice, short, concise thing to say. It's a lot, but no, it's doable. So what you'll start with your dissertation is really coming in and figuring out which methodology really fits what you want to know. So a lot of times when students get to dissertation, they have an idea of what they want to do and what they want to know, but perhaps the methodology doesn't match up. So you'll be exploring that with your methodologist as well as your dissertation chair. In the first semester or dissertation seminar, what you're going to be doing is completing chapters 1, 2, and 3 and forming drafts of those. So when I say complete, don't think of it as an absolute completion done, because we need to switch gears and think about the fact that dissertation isn't a project that we're done with until your final defense. And even then, you've got a little work afterwards, okay? We have to switch gears from being a student to a doctoral candidate and researcher. So part of that becomes working on chapters 1, 2, and 3, which are outlined in the manual very well. And your chair will take responsibility to help you through those. You'll also be forming your committee at that time, finding your methodologist, a statistician, perhaps, if that's required as well, if you're doing quantitative, and looking at a subject matter expert or a faculty member who is interested in that topic. So it doesn't mean that they necessarily have done that research, but they show interest and they would like to work with you on that. So once we form those committees, we work on those chapters, and you'll be working primarily with your chair, and then working with your methodologist to work out the nuts and bolts of chapter 3, which is your methodology and your plan on how to do that. You'll also be working on IRB and gaining insight on what is required. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little later because I know there's questions about IRB. But gaining IRB approval and completing your city certification, which is part of that. Usually in the first semester, students will get a really good foundation of those first 3 chapters and a good preparation. It can be difficult, not saying it can't be done, but it can be difficult to commit to 3 chapters and defend in that first semester simply because of due dates. Okay, so a lot of times in the second semester or dissertation 1 is where we'll get our defense of our proposal. And so for your defense of your proposal, your chair will review those chapters. Send them out to your methodologist and to your subject matter expert. You'll get feedback. We'll make sure everything is prepared. And keep in mind that the feedback is guidance for you so that it goes through IRB a little easier because we can understand what IRB is looking for. So if we're asking for clarification or we're saying, oh, you need to say this again and again, because a lot of it is repetitive from chapters 1, 2, and 3, the purpose is that we want to see this be, 1, a great introduction of you into academia, but 2, we want to see it be a successful defense through IRB at this point. So when we set that up, there's a process and it's in the handbook, but basically we have to send it to your committee. Your committee will send back feedback. And at that point, you'll tighten anything up that we have any concerns about, prepare a defense of proposal PowerPoint that you'll work with your chair on. And then you will send it back to your committee for 2 weeks prior to your defense date after completing the defense proposal approval date. And again, these are all checklists, but kind of walking you through it. And then we go to your defense. With your proposal defense, it can be a pass with revisions, or a fail. Pass with revisions is the most common, and those revisions could be minor adjustments or adding things or clarifying things. So don't see that as a negative. It just means as we're working as a committee and coming together, we may have additional feedback, or we may need to polish some things up before it goes to IRB. Once that's done, you'll talk with your chair. Your chair will approve it for IRB. You'll complete the IRB trainings, and then we complete the information and forward that on to the IRB. Once IRB approves your study, which now is taking a little longer. It used to take about 2 to 3 weeks, and now it's closer to, I believe, 3 or 4 weeks. So you just have to take a deep breath and learn to relax when you have these pauses, because it's out of your control. Once IRB approves it, you're set to go. So then you move into data collection. Data collection is the thing that we can't determine. So can we do this in 3 semesters? Sure, if everything falls into place. But if it takes a little longer to gain data, it might take a little longer before you can start processing that. Once you collect all your data, you'll be working with your methodologist and going through that. If it's quantitative, you may have an additional statistician to confirm your stats. You'll be running your own stats, but you would also need to make sure that those are confirmed by a statistician. We want to make sure that we're working with your methodologist both qualitatively or quantitatively on chapters 4, which are your results, and chapter 5, which talks about the implications of your study and what it's contributing to the field and future ideas, what would be the next steps. Then we go through that process of refining chapters 4 and 5 and going back through chapters 1, 2, and 3 and changing those to past tense. So it won't be I will gain IRB approval, but it'll be IRB approval was gained, right? So chapters 1, 2, and 3 get reviewed or to the past tense. We combine chapter 4 and we move through chapter 5. And again, working with your committee members, your chair will kind of give an evaluation. We have to propose a date. We have to send it to our committee for review, get it back, include that feedback, send it back to the committee 2 weeks prior to your defense date, and then we move into our defense. So the final defense is there. Again, it can be pass, fail, or pass with revisions. The most common is pass with revisions, and it can be simple APA adjustments or small things. Once we get that done, we then need to move it forward to the department and have that done and have it in before graduation. Here's the one tricky thing for due dates. The due dates for the last possible day to defend are noted on the calendar for each semester. So for this semester, I believe it's the middle of November or early December, but you have to backtrack that 5 or 6 weeks to think about sending it to your committee, getting it back, and doing all the work and sending it to them 2 weeks before. So really, if you think about it 5 or 6 weeks prior to that due date of are you going to be prepared to go forward for that? If your chair tells you that they want you to wait, keep in mind it's a hard conversation to have. And the only reason we would do that is because we don't want to be rushing through that time frame. And we want to make sure that this is a happy and positive experience for you when you get to defense, right? So if I always tell my students, if I don't think that this is going to go forward or there's a sticking point, I'd rather we have that conversation than go into defense and have it not be a positive result, right? So we want to think about that. It can still go south, right, at some point. And I think that was one of the questions we'll talk about later. But really, your chair and your committee are going to make sure that you're best prepared and that your document is best prepared for both your proposal defense as well as your final defense. So in a nutshell, that's the process. Did that answer the question, Dr. Stretch?
Oh, you did excellent. You even covered the next one, which was about committee members, so that's great. But
okay, thanks. Sorry, jumped ahead.
well, one of the things that I really want to highlight that I hope that people take from what your response was is that this is an iterative process. This is not a one and done, right?
Mm-mm.
That it's just a constant process. And I always like to remind doc students that your name is not the only name on that product. And so we take it very seriously. We're going to be forever linked with you. And we want to make sure that the product that has our names on it as well are worth, what we wanted out there. We want it to be quality.
And it's a real transition. I know for me it was when I hit dissertation, because I just wanted to be done. Like you do assignments, and even if you spend 16 weeks on it, you hand it in and you're done. It's never done. It's never done until the very last time. So wipe out being done and just look at revisions and continued revisions as part of the growth process of this project that you're going to be bringing forward. And I'm sure the alumni will mention that they've gone through that. It gets frustrating, and we understand that. I was frustrated too. It's like, oh, another revision. But again, think about the idea that we want to make sure that this is refined, polished, and a wonderful introduction of you into academia and as a researcher, as well as Dr. Stretch said, our name's associated with it too. So we want to make sure that we're, introducing you and saying, look at this person. They've done a wonderful job, not just like, oh, look, we kind of pushed them through. Okay, so all that feedback is intended to help you. And if you get frustrated with your chair with feedback or with a committee member, talk about it. Talk about that idea, talk about where you're getting stuck, talk about what that feels like. We understand that, and we're here to help you process that. But you have to let us know what you're feeling so that we can help process it as well.
Yeah. But really approaching it from the sense of this is a process and not an end result is really great advice.
Right.
So thank you. Yes. All right, Dr. Hetfield, what about any methodologies that maybe students would want to avoid, or maybe ones that tend to be preferred? Do you have any feedback or thoughts on that?
So I wanted to add just a little bit more to what Dr. McCullen was saying in response to the first question. Thank you. So I've been chairing dissertations for about a decade now, and I've noticed some kind of stuck points that students may experience. And it definitely is realistic to finish in 3 semesters, but here are some stuck points that could get in the way of you achieving that. So 3 of those points are actually points in the dissertation process, and 2 are general stuck points that students sometimes experience. So the first one of those is finding a gap in the literature and narrowing your topic to something that is answerable in a dissertation. That process takes a very varying amount of time from person to person. I've seen it take anywhere from like people getting it in a month to people taking 2 full semesters to narrow the topic. And so I think that's one stuck point to think about. Another one is losing momentum after the data collection process. So that can be a real easy point, even in your future career, to just sort of put away the data you've collected and not pick it up again for a while. And that takes some time when you're trying to finish this in a year. In qualitative inquiry, I think people can sometimes feel overwhelmed with the massive amount of data and how they can really organize that into a quality chapter 4. So a general thing that happens that I've noticed is that students will focus on asking too many people for input on their dissertation process, and they get pulled in so many different directions, right? So your chair is your chair, and you want to go to the chair first, and your chair will help you figure out when to go to your other committee members. When do you bring the methodologist in? When do you bring the subject matter expert in? And many of you may know other people who have gotten PhDs or are working toward them, and getting everyone's advice and opinion is not going to be helpful. Okay, so the other thing is for some students, managing the emotions that come up during the process, including really engaging in resistance to the process and the variety of emotions like overwhelm that can come up, can really get in the way too. And so grounding yourself through that process, I think, is really helpful. So that's what I wanted to share about that piece. And then going to methodology. So I think all of us have a little different set of expectations with regard to methodologies that are appropriate. But as a department, I think we have a fairly good understanding of what would be reasonable for a dissertation. So again, something like, I don't think we could do something like an autoethnography in our department. And although I love that kind of research and think it's highly valuable, I'm not sure that that would be acceptable in our department. Outside of that, Dr. McCullen, do you have anything to add to that?
I think too, and students that have worked with me will have heard me say this repeatedly. We sometimes come in with big ideas, and it's like a 5-book volumes of research. And for dissertation, we only need to do that first volume. So we may need to step it back. So a lot of students come in, they want to do a mixed method study, which is literally 2 different full studies, right? So maybe we want to stop and take it back a little, answer those initial questions, form that foundation, and then you have your career to build those other steps forward. So I think either methodology is useful, but what we need to, and do very doable, but sometimes we need to rein in that idea a little bit to make it something that we can accomplish in a dissertation timeframe. And, you know, I've said to students, like, that's a great idea if you want to spend like 3 years with me working on this. Nobody wants to do that, right? So maybe we need to just do that foundational introduction. And then with that idea that in chapter 5, you're going to be talking about future research recommendations and designs. Those are those things that you have your whole career to continue to explore. So when your chair tells you, like, maybe we need to reel this back, just keep that in mind that it's doable. Any research is doable, but within the time frame of it that you want to commit to for a dissertation and with all your other responsibilities, we may need to bring it into that more realistic sense, if that makes sense.
And I would speak to, because I mean, quantitative is really my area. Quantitative analysis is also another important component. Like, I've had students come to me and want to do like a paired t-test, which often is not robust enough for doctoral level work. So, you know, when you're going through your CES 734 course, if you're thinking about doing a quantitative study, really take that course as an opportunity to develop your ideas and really identify a doctoral level analysis that you can use. So that's something, use the classes that you're taking to help you develop along the way, for sure. For the professors, would either one of you like to talk any more about the IRB process? Because I think maybe there's some things to be warned of and things to know about ahead of time that could be helpful.
I'll jump in first here. So the IRB process is ever being updated. And so by the time you get into your dissertation sequence, it may change from how it is now. Certainly, since I've been teaching dissertation seminars at Cumberland's, it's changed many times. And so the great news is that there is an IRB organization. IRB Research is the name of it, in iLearn/Blackboard. And if you sign up for that organization, you can even go ahead and get kind of started on the process of like taking your human subjects training, the city training, and going ahead and getting that out of the way. And they have a step-by-step module that you take a little quiz currently in its format at the end of each module, and it allows you access to the next module of the training. So making sure that you have access to that IRB organization on Blackboard, I think, is really critical. And then when you have questions about the IRB process, in addition to your chair, you can always reach out to IRB, which is just irb@ucumberlands.edu.
Yeah, and the other thing with IRB is, as Dr. Hatfield said, it does continually change based on who's reviewing and how it's going. So you can't compare your experience with other people. Okay, so they're going to look at each study individually. They're going to assess it differently. You need to be working with your chair if it gets kicked back for any reason, and that's not a failure. It just means that they're requiring more clarification or there's an additional requirement there. But really think about the idea that you're going to be working with your chair very closely prior to submitting to IRB. So one of the things that they need is approval from your chair that we say it's okay to submit. So what I have my students do is, and I know Dr. Hatfield does too, we have them send us, the outline of all the questions for the form of what they're putting in. And we're going to go through and double check that and make sure everything's accurate and we're addressing each of those pieces. Then we're going to send it to IRB. How IRB views that can be different in how they interpret it, and they may come back with questions. Keep in mind, IRB is not made entirely of, CES professors or faculty. It's departments from all over the university. So if it's assigned to someone as a reviewer and they review it and they have questions, it's not that they're questioning your writing or you as a person. It's just they may require additional understanding or information on that. There'll be guidelines too that are explained in the IRB training and the IRB folder there. So that's a great thing to join and get used to and start looking at. But also keep in mind, with certain things, I know like social media, there's a concern with using social media, right? So if you think that's how you're going to gain access to your clients or to your participants, that may be a concern for IRB. And so a lot of times as you're reviewing it with your professor or with your chair is going to kind of go through and say, I've seen this be a problem before, or they want to know this. I know a huge one for them is using email, like a listserv, but you have to be very clear that you're using a listserv which posts and you don't have access to that email list of the listserv because they don't want you having access to people's information and reaching out to them personally. They instead want it to be posted. And if people are interested, they approach you. So that's one thing that I've recently seen be a difficult to navigate for people. But knowing that going into it is something that we can kind of direct around and say, okay, we want to make sure that we're doing this. The other thing with IRB, and especially for the department, keep in mind too that it's going to need to be counselor focused. Your degree is in counselor education and supervision. So we're not going to be using social workers and we're not going to be pulling from psychologists or psychiatrists. We're going to want to use counselors as that population or counselor supervisors or counselor educators. So just keep that in mind as well as where we'll gain access from them because IRB is going to want to say it needs to relate to your degree.
So Dr. McClellan, what if I say have a pharmacy degree already, or I have, an interest in say essential oils or something? Like, how could I incorporate that, or is that something that should be weighted and done with after I'm finished?
I would recommend that it be kind of shelved until later, simply because even if I had a degree if I have a PhD in another area, right now I'm a doctoral student in counselor education and supervision. So my work needs to show that I am earning that degree. So my other degrees don't really matter because in this field, in this program, I'm still working towards that. Does that make sense to everyone? So we really kind of want to keep that focus. Now, again, down the road, when you've got both or, a history of this or an interest in that, we can combine those down the road. I have an interest in art therapy, so I'm going to do a study with art therapists. I'm not an art therapist, but for my dissertation, I could focus on art therapy techniques for counselors, but I couldn't focus on art therapy and counseling. Does that make sense? Because I don't qualify for both. Did that answer the question?
Very well. Dr. Hepburn, anything else you would want to add about IRB and navigating that process?
I think one important tip is just to remember to go to your chair. Your chair is there to support you through the process and, really develop a relationship with your chair and they'll be there to help guide you.
All right, so Two more questions for the faculty before we go to the alumni. But what type of support do faculty typically provide students, and how often would students expect to meet, or candidates expect to meet with their faculty?
You want to go first on that, Dr. Hatfield?
Sure. So the support varies. In my world, the support varies based on student need. And so sometimes the support is like providing basic information about how to navigate through the process. Sometimes the support is more kind of emotionally focused. I mean, there's often lots of tears through the dissertation process, and having someone that you can kind of share a little bit of that with can be helpful. I mean, typically we touch base with our dissertation students at least every other week. And sometimes it might be quite more frequently with that as the chair. And so your other committee members, it's going to vary widely depending on their styles of working with you and where you are in the process. So your methodologist is going to be pretty involved in the process from fairly early on too. And your subject matter expert, it kind of depends. Like if your chair doesn't know much about the topic, then you may rely a little more heavily on your subject matter expert in the beginning. And some folks in that role like to be involved from the beginning of the process. And some folks who are subject matter experts don't want to see a draft until right before you're proposing. Dr. McCullen.
Yes, I think it's important that you ask your committee members how often they want to be involved and at what point they want to be involved. Sometimes someone will say, I want to see it once your chair's approved it and once it's really finalized. Others will say, I want to be consulted along that way. As a chair, my job is to work with you and to help you and to guide and give you approval. So like I always tell my students, like if you're going to reach out to your methodologist, just CC me on that email. So if they ask me a question about it, I know what's going on. We're okay with that. Or let's wait on this before we send it to your methodologist until we have it formatted this way. But you're going to want to talk to your methodologist and your subject matter expert and ask them how often, because faculty members have different preferences of how often or at what point they want to be involved and to what degree. I agree with Dr. Hatfield, a big part as your chair is your go-to person. And that's the person that is going to be there to give you emotional support, writing support, APA feedback. We're going to kind of look at the whole idea and really be doing that. Then we'll kind of get it to a point where we feel it's good to go to the methodologist. But if you feel the need to interact with them beforehand or your subject matter expert, just, let them know, talk to them and see where they're at. But from the door, when you ask them to be on your committee, ask that question. How involved do you want to be? How often do you want me to check in with you? Even if it's just a simple, once every 2 weeks, just tell me where you're at. Some faculty members will like that. Others will say, oh, when your committee chair says to send it to me, let me know. So we've got to kind of look at that idea and really make sure that you're getting that from the door and then letting your chair know. If a student says my methodologist wants me to touch base every 2 weeks, I say, hey, that's great. Again, just CC me so they know I'm aware, so we're all on the same page. The biggest part of this is communication. So with your committee members, and I've seen this happen where it's worked against the student. A student will work with their methodologist or with their subject matter expert, but they're not communicating that with their chair or the other committee members. What happens is they're being led one way and then they're getting conflicting feedback from the other. So you really, whatever we're working on, we're a team, but you're the center, you're the core of that communication. So you've got to keep your chair updated on what you're talking to the other members about. And we ultimately need to work together as a team. Does that make sense? Because as a chair, I'm working with you, but I can't tell other faculty members what they have to do or when they have to do it. Dr. Hatfield, I think you're jumping in.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that you make. And it reminded me that another question that you want to ask your committee members is how quickly they will be able to get you feedback. Like, what is their expectation for that? As a department, there's a general expectation that you'll hear something within a couple of weeks. And if not, maybe some communication about, it may take a little longer. Some faculty are very quick with feedback, and others, because of their roles, take a bit longer. So 2 weeks is a reasonable expectation, but that's something that you want to clarify when you're kind of interviewing people to be a part of your dissertation committee.
Yes, and I agree with that. And I also think that if you're reaching out to a committee member, if Dr. Hatfield is on your committee and you've reached out to her and she's not getting back to you, touch base with your chair, because your chair may know that something else is going on. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I know Dr. Hatfield has been away at a conference and maybe she didn't communicate that with you, but I know, and I can kind of maybe reach out, or I can just kind of fill you in and say, just be patient. What I tell my students is, you can send a gentle reminder of an email and say, hey, I sent this to you. I'm just wondering if you need any, updated revisions or things like that. Keep in mind your committee members are doing this to help you, but it's also in addition to their other responsibilities. So when you are a faculty member, you'll be doing your full-time faculty job. And then as a committee member, it's the additional responsibilities that you're taking on. So just keep that in mind. But pay attention to feedback time, because like Dr. Hatfield said, 2 weeks is the average. Some are longer. Some might be a lot quicker. So you want to pay attention to that and have an idea, because if you're working with, I know Dr. Hatfield and I turn things over rather quickly, and somebody else is maybe 3 or 4 weeks. You have to take that time in consideration, because that lapse in feedback, we need to stop and pause. So those things can be out of our control. And even on my quick end, I tend to turn things over rather quickly back to students, but rather quickly might be 5 days, or it might be within the 2 weeks. So depending on what else was on my plate. So just realize that they're doing a job and they're there to help you, but you're probably not the only dissertation they're reading, and you're definitely not the only papers or assignments that they're grading.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if you send us stuff when we're reading comps, that makes it a little harder. So it's like really working with the committee members to plan timing. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the alumni and give you guys a chance to answer a couple of questions. So first question is, how did you choose your topic and your design?
So I can go. I'm having a little bit of internet issues, so if you guys cannot hear me, just jump to, okay. So for me, I gotta say that it was like, dissertation was 3 semesters, but really it was like a 2.5-year process. I really started using the classes that I was taking before dissertation for me to narrow down the topic and get the feedback from professors. So I remember taking Dr. Alay's class, and I remember, for example, her giving me feedback like, this is too broad, like you have to narrow it down, or things like that. So I was in a way using the feedback from other professors along the way for me to arrive to a topic. Also, I used all my resources. I paid someone. I spent a good amount of money during dissertation, and I don't encourage this, but it's just it really helped me. So I paid someone. I was researching identities. I paid someone who was a researcher in identities from Columbia to meet with him and get feedback on, any recommendations that he had on my topic. And UC has some kind of like tutoring program. And there were tutors that I found in their website, the library website, for qualitative research. So I met with one of those as well, and kind of presented the topic. This is what I'm doing. What do you think about that? And really a lot of like bouncing ideas off with Dr. Hatfield when I was ready to, Dr. Hatfield was my chair. So with my chair, when I was ready to, start writing.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So for me, I'm one of those students who changed my topic. So in advanced research, I went in with big ideas. I thought I'm going to do this big thing and it's going to be amazing. But then when I really started learning more and more, I realized that this will be my research once I've graduated because it's massive. My study was still massive, as Dr. Hatfield will tell you. I did grounded theory. So, but that original study really looked at too much, and it really, the scope of it would have been beyond dissertation. So I did change it. I have no regrets. It did push me back a little bit in terms of time, but I'll tell you that just even spending time researching that original topic really helped me as a researcher to be able to really look thoroughly at research. I'll say that, a couple of different things. For me, English is not my first language, it's my third. So I had to learn my own process and be comfortable with it and not feel pressured to move at a pace that just didn't work for me. And I think, going back to what Dr. Hatfield said about relationships, I feel like building a relationship with your chair where they really get to know you and your process and how you think and how you need to do things has been valuable, because I'm the type of person who I can't read and write. Some people in my cohort could read and write that week. I need to read and sit with what I read. And sometimes it feels like I should be writing, I should be doing this. But once I accepted this is my process, and this is how my brain works, I need to really listen to that. I felt much more comfortable. And I also listened to the idea that I'm going to change my topic. No regrets still. I'm now actually working on that topic as a post-PhD student. So that was helpful for me, building relationships with all of my committee members, helping them understand me and my process, helping them understand why I'm looking at what I'm looking for in my topic. And that also streamlined the methodology for me. So I asked myself, what am I trying to find out? And why am I trying to find this out? And therefore, how am I going to go about it? So I hope that answers the question. But again, really, really find your process, honor your process, and be comfortable with your process.
That kind of leads us to our next question of what was your process and how did you figure that out, right? Like what were your writing strategies, your time frames for writing? How did that work? Why don't you start us off and then we can go back to Mary.
Yeah, I think for me, once that pressure to say I've got to be done in one semester was over, this is what Dr. McClellan was saying. I realized that this is a process that will keep getting updated and improved. My first draft is not what my final defense looked like, believe me. And really, once I trusted that if I can get a good product, it'll be even better once it's polished. I think initially that I wanted it to be amazing in that first run, and that really wasn't helpful. So it was more helpful to kind of spend some time really creating that big draft. My process was to sit down and map. I didn't know that there was such a thing as mapping, and I wish I did. So that would have saved me a lot of time, but I did learn that. So sitting down and mapping, what do I want to know? What has been done here? So I pulled out a lot of articles and looked at the recommendation sections that were really similar to what I was looking for. And from those recommendations, I started to find gaps. So people would say, we studied this and this, but we wish somebody could do more of that. And so I started kind of cataloging those. For me, Excel was a good friend of mine. I know a lot in my cohort had some other kind of programs that worked for them. But for me, Excel was helpful throughout until I defended. So I kept all of those in the Excel. I wrote them down. I'm like, okay, so-and-so did this. And let me tell you, start that early. You think you will have time to collect that, but you won't. So every article that I read, I kept on an Excel. I kept a little bit of what was involved in it, some of the recommendations from it, and then also some things that I thought could be helpful to me. I started that early, and therefore when it came to defense, I really already had that. I didn't have to go back and find anything. So that was my early big advice for everybody. Keep track of that. And then from the recommendations and what people were saying needed to happen, I started to see what my gap was. And again, the gap took me, so the advanced research, remember I changed topics. So it took me over a semester to find exactly what I needed. But once I found it, it was easier to then start to look at my lit review. And in the lit review, I literally tried to find all of what I could find on that topic, and people's recommendations and what they said was missing. And I started to, again, on my Excel, catalog a lot of that. And then timeline, I'll be honest, time was difficult for me. If I can give you any input, if you can at all take time off, that would be helpful to you. I was not able to take time off, so it was a lot more challenging. So working weekends, I'm not good at working at night. So I woke up early. Worked up weekends. And that mapping of, okay, this is what I'd like to do this week. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm able to do. So create that. So you go in, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, it helps kind of keep you on track. What else did I do? Vera and I talked a lot, complained to each other a lot, sometimes felt like running away a lot together. So having a good somebody who's going to say, okay, get up, what are you doing? That's been helpful to us. Yeah, so again, being organized, you have to be organized. You think you will have time, I'm saying it again, but you won't. So from the get-go, every single thing you read when you're waiting, catalog that so you don't have to go back to it. Keep a good track of the summary, recommendations, then you don't have to read it again, right? So I'm thinking, so that was the big thing for me. Create a map of what you're gonna do, and as much as you can, stick to it.
And have an accountability partner. I like
and
that.
having partners who are going to say to you, it's Sunday, what are you doing? And you're like, I should be writing.
All right, Dr. Clement?
Yeah, so I would like to add that just accept that your life is going to be different during that year and a half. So I actually warned family members and friends, and I told them, I'm going to be MIA for 1.5 years. And I took a vacation in July for 2 weeks, and then I started dissertation, didn't take a vacation until I defended. So just come to terms that it's just going to be crazy. Okay. So I moved my work schedule. I wasn't able to take time off either. So lots of weekends and lots of waking up at 4 a.m. because like Dr. Ali Turco, I write better in the morning. So my productive time is from 4 a.m. to noon. Afternoon, I can't really think like that. So lots of waking up early, lots of taking half day of work so I could write something and then go to work. And then I moved my schedule to have 4 10s. So I had, I worked 40 hours in 4 days, and my day off was a Wednesday. So I wouldn't take Monday or Friday for a long weekend vacation or stuff like that. So it was a Wednesday. And sometimes I would write, and sometimes I wouldn't feel like writing. So I would like do article reading, but always doing something during that time, dissertation related. And then the other thing I would recommend is there is a lot of research in whatever topic you choose. There is going to be a lot of research. So I put my 3 questions in the board where I was working because I had to remember what am I trying to find out? Because otherwise I would get lost in the research. Like, oh, attachment and adoptees, let's go this way. No, wait, but I'm researching identities. So having the questions or the mapping, like Dr. Ali Turco mentioned, like just having a clear visual of where you're going, I think was very helpful when you are reviewing the literature.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think too, sometimes you don't want to write, your brain resists, right? So I found it really helpful to understand that even when I'm reading an article, I'm actually still working. So the times where I felt like this, I don't have anything else to say anymore on this paper, I would just read. And then I would just feel like, okay, I'm adding more to my study, a lot more depth, but I'm not necessarily feeling like that pressure to write. And that released me, actually. Having a dedicated space, it seems simple. But I found that for me, it was really chaotic to move different places, write in different rooms. And I'd lose things, I'd forget the article here. And then and I decided from early on that I'd have one area, and this is my area to write. That also helped create boundaries, though, of my space, especially because I didn't have a lot of time. That when I'm moving away from this space, it means I'm relaxing and I'm not writing. But when I'm sitting here, it doesn't matter what's happening, I'm going to be working. So I found that creating a little space and dividing it away from everything else was helpful. And then actually, as time goes on, of course, programming, when we're all counselors, as soon as I sat down, my brain was ready to work. So I programmed myself to do that. So I thought that was funny. So as soon as I sit in this area, I'm like, oh, I can be productive. This is actually still my area of doing work, believe it or not. So that was good.
So if the two of you could go back in time and change one thing about your dissertation process, like, or have, I wish I had known this, what would that be?
So for me, the first one, and I think Dr. Hatfield touched base on this, but you're going to receive a lot of feedback, and you're going to receive a lot of feedback from the 3 members. So they are going to make comments. It depends on how everyone works. But in my dissertation, they make comments on my document. Don't delete those comments. Respond to those comments and leave them there. Because sometimes, whoever gave feedback maybe forgot that they asked you to change that, and then you change it, and now they are suggesting to change it back how you had it. So just save yourself trouble with that. And also because let's say Dr. Hatfield made a comment and you're sending to the methodologist, and the methodologist is able to see what Dr. Hatfield is thinking. So it really allows a continuous of thought, I guess. And then it just saves a lot of trouble, a lot of contradiction, a lot of frustration. Just reply to those comments and leave them there. Just come to terms. I'm the one that cannot have new emails or pending comments. Well, you're going to have thousands of comments in that document, and that's not going to go anywhere until it's fully approved. And just deal with that. But don't delete them is my recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think for me, I had version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or however many. And the reason is I didn't want to redo any of that original. So I kept the original feedback, and the update had version 2. And then if I did more revisions, it would be version 3 of the same document, but I could always go back and trace all of the revisions and why I had to revise. So I made notes of, okay, this is version 1. These are the revisions that had to happen in version 1, version 2. And that really helped me keep it together. Dr. Hatfield talked about the volume. I cannot emphasize how much volume you're going to have. And so really being organized from early on. So for me, if I wish somebody would have reminded me, because I was told, I didn't believe it. Just reminded me a lot of volume. So keeping track of things, having an area where you label all of your things and you keep them in one area. But even beyond some of the logistical things, I think early on being able to really have that strong sense of I can write, I can do this, people have done it before, I can do it too. And how do I even think about writing this? This seems so big. So I wish I could go back and have all of the things I learned to be sort of streamlined into this is how you think about writing. Mm-hmm. So I learned that I can. So how do you do that? So the kind of like the mechanism of thinking about dissertation, that would have been helpful. But of course, you learn it as you do it.
I had to laugh when you said version 1, 2, and 3. I had, when I was writing my dissertation, we didn't have clouds then. That's how long ago it was. But I would email at the end of every work session, I would email my husband and my best friend a copy of my dissertation at the end of every single work session because I was terrified of losing it. So yeah, you've got to come up with those strategies for yourself. All right, for the whole committee, What's one book or one resource that you really couldn't have done your dissertation without and you just really recommend as like a go-to resource? Dr. Hatfield, why don't you start us off?
You know, I literally cannot think of one at the moment. For me, like, it depends on your methodology. Like, depending on your methodology, there's great books for many of the different methodologies. So that's something you want to check in with your chair and methodologist about too. What about you, Dr. McCullen?
I think that using the handbook for the program becomes very important. And keep in mind that may switch as you go. So you are responsible to match the format that you're defending under. So, but keeping that and going through that handbook, because the handbook will help outline. What I recommend to my students is taking the handbook and then noting any questions that they have with each section or feedback that, kind of like Vero said, keeping that feedback, right? Going there, but noting the feedback and the questions. I do that with students, and I take a section and it's saying we're talking about their definitions of terms. And so I might put in a lot of feedback of, did we consider this? Have we done this? Have we done that? So when you get that feedback from your professor, writing those in is kind of keeping a checklist of the additional format that you might need becomes useful. And I agree with Dr. Hatfield that the books that students tell me work for them are what they're most comfortable doing. So if they're comfortable with one book that's kind of a supportive guide, and there's a lot of books out there that'll say, hey, this is how it feels, this is okay, and that helps you move forward, that's great. There's other that are more robust and focus on what you need to do and how to enhance each of those sections. And then there's specific books on the methodologies and different things like that. But the key is really you can't compare yours to anybody else's, and you need to use that UC handbook to make sure that it fits our guides. Regardless of what any of the books say, they may say chapter 3 does this. Okay, but our chapter 3 says this. So we really make sure you follow that guide.
Good advice. Portia?
I think for me, coding was the coding manual was a really, really helpful one, just simply because, again, just the experience of what it looks like to code or how you even code. So it's a pretty straightforward book that, so I did grounded theory qualitative. I did that in Shamaz, so I did social constructivist. So Shamaz's books were really helpful for me, and also the coding manual. I think everything else was really a very good discussion with your chair and the methodologist, really looking at how you're going to approach things, but that specific, how do I do this? The coding manual was helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I use the coding manual for, almost everything really throughout. After chapter 2, you use it the whole time. That was very helpful. And honestly, on my end, podcasts were very helpful as well. Not because of knowledge per se, but it's like there are podcasts about dissertation, and just hearing people going through this and sharing their experience, and like, it's possible, it's doable, this is what they did, this is what they tried. I remember listening to a podcast once about like cold showers, and just reminding yourself that you're not alone and that many people have done this. Not many, but a good fair amount of people have done this.
So any things that you wish you had known before you started your dissertation that maybe you've learned since then, or you know now?
That you can do a dissertation, you can do it. Believe you can do it. I think for me, really, really, it's having that supportive cohort or friends or family who will keep you going, people who will make you lots of tea or coffee if you need it, food, who'll be like, did you eat food? Did you get up and move? So I think the biggest thing was really the belief that it's possible. And that even if you are overwhelmed with data or overwhelmed with the lit review, that it's one at a time, right? It's just sometimes easy to forget that if you do one at a time, you'll get through it. And I remember hearing people talk about finishing and thinking, I'm going to be so upset at them because it was probably easy for them, but it wasn't. I'm like, I don't want to hear you say you can do it, but you really can. Again, being systematic, being prepared. For me, Excel was my very good friend. Some people really found good coding software. My head couldn't do it. So literally hand by hand coding is what I did. And I felt that like I knew my data really well. I could tell you all about it. And that is my process though. So again, find your process or find somebody who can help you find your process. Because sometimes I just really needed my chair to say, well, that's really not you. That's not what you do. This is, how about if you look at that, leaning on them, letting them know that you need support and what kind of support you need. And believing that I can do that, right, too. So that was helpful. And reading as much, listening to podcasts, YouTube. I didn't know there was so much on YouTube on dissertations, just some little things. So finding YouTube, some reputable YouTube sites exist. Leaning into some of us alumni, don't hesitate to reach out. If you connect to any one of our story, at least for me, I'll volunteer myself. You reach out to me. I love coding. Who knew? I have developed a love for coding. So I'm happy to help anybody with some ideas. Yeah, and that's just literally from coding many, many, many interviews, because grounded theory is huge, right? Anybody who likes grounded theory, feel free to reach out to me.
I would like to add that, I didn't think about this, but the one person I couldn't do my dissertation without is the editor. So I hired an editor, and she is absolutely freaking amazing. Okay, like she helped me so much, and she, as you can hear, English is my second language. Writing is not my strongest skill. So I knew from a get-go, how am I gonna do this in my second language when I know writing is not my strongest skill? And I started working with her even before I started dissertation class. And I just couldn't do it without her. I think I finished dissertation fairly quickly, and I think that's because of her.
Colin, Dr. Hatfield, any other words of advice?
I learned during my dissertation process that self-care is important, and that taking time off does not put you behind. So what I learned to do, and I recommend to all of my students, is that you take at least like a day and a half a week off and find where you're not working on dissertation. And it allows things to settle in your head and come back. So for me, it was Friday afternoon until Sunday morning. That gave me time to, clean the house, spend time with my family, go grocery shopping, do all those things, nap, right? Things that we don't think we can do, and not have coursework or all those other things. My fear initially was that it would set me back. But what it did was, when I came back to the topic on Sunday or Sunday afternoon, I was excited to work on this again, because I worked on it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, right? So Friday night, take the time off. Have those times where you're going to build in a regular time to take care of yourself and do all those things, so that, Vero said she was MIA, but she still did have time to do things with her family by building that in. So you're going to be busy and focusing and creating that structure for yourself and that schedule. But in the same vein, prioritize your self-care, because we want to see you come out the other side healthy, happy, and strong, and not, kind of worn out and just like, just go on, be done with it and away from it. So make sure that you're building that time in as well.
I have to kind of laugh at that because thinking about what Portia said as well, I actually have a friend who's a chiropractor who came and gave me adjustments throughout the day as I was writing my chapter 4 and 5. You have to build that support team, right? And it was such a wonderful thing. Like, he came to my office and I'm like, why are you here? And he's like, I figured you would need an adjustment right about now. I'll be back in 6 hours.
Yeah. My husband would bring me in a snack. He'd come and check on me. And then he'd say, you've been doing this for 3 hours. Maybe we should go for a walk. Build those times in, because sometimes we're in such a focus. Allow other people to understand and support us. And the only other thing I can really, really think of that was important for me doing dissertation is realize that you're going to hit speed bumps, and that's normal and that's part of the process. I had to restart my dissertation 3 separate times because I worked with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and I got right up to where they approved it, but they got new data that week and they wanted me to redraft it to fit that. I celebrated each one of those moments, and we went out to dinner and started over, and then come back a day or two later and kick back. But celebrate each and every step, whether it's a setback, whether it's a delay, or whether it is, hey, you got chapter 1 done and you're done with it. Yay, go celebrate that. Celebrate each step along the way. It keeps you motivated to move forward. And when the process gives you downtime, take it. Okay, so if you send it to me, you send your dissertation to me. I just did this to a student. They sent it to me yesterday and I said, that's wonderful. I'll give this back to you next week. I want you to take time off and enjoy your weekend. And they were like, but can't you get it back to me sooner? And I was like, you need to take time off. So sometimes those pauses that faculty give you are intended to use them for other things, do things. My dissertation students need to report to me every single week what they're doing for self-care. So I would strongly recommend that you keep a log of self-care. And Vera's laughing because I was not on her committee, but I harassed her repeatedly about self-care throughout her dissertation process.
And I want to add too, those downtimes are important times too, right? Because I was delayed a whole semester because of some bureaucratic things between the 2 universities that I was working with. But what actually ended up happening is I developed this relationship, a very deep and meaningful relationship with the HBCU that I was working with, that has been a relationship that I've maintained for 20 plus years. Because of that downtime and having to navigate through that obstacle, it's really been a foundational point in my career that has informed so many different components of my professional work.
Yeah, and my chair and I are still working together on different projects. We have a book in progress right now. So it's really, you're creating and forming these relationships and these supports and guidance. So, you're going to move from someone being your chair or your committee member or in your cohort, and then they become your colleagues and your support down the road. So, when you're working, when you're doing research, when you're doing these things, just keep in mind, use your cohort too for support, because although your family and friends want to understand and want to support you, unless you've done a dissertation, you're not really going to understand all the ins and outs and the frustrations. They try. My husband tried. My best friend tried. They were so supportive and they got close. But my cohort was the ones who were like, yeah, I get that. And my committee, they were like, yeah, I totally understand that, because they've been there, done that. So just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. I agree with that very much. That building that network of support, people who will remind you and remind each other, right? Because you're going to do it for them and that. I'd like to also add that dissertation is stressful. It's all of the things, but really you develop a love affair with your project. I think for me, what really got me through, even when I didn't want to get up one more time, was I just loved my topic. So if you are early in the process, and if it's at all possible, really, really choose something you're passionate about if you can, so that you're not just getting it done, right? And perhaps this can lay the foundation for your future research, right? That's something that you can build afterwards, something that you'll be proud of. And I think for me, even up to defense, I learned during defense, because it was so amazing. Pick something that you're interested in, rather than something you need to just get through and be done with, if you can. It really, really helps.
Dr. Hatfield, anything else with you?
I was thinking about one of the things that Dr. Ali Turco said related to just knowing yourself. I mean, I think that is of critical importance because you're going to get lots of advice. People are going to say things like, set aside this amount of structured time every day to write. And that's just not going to work for everyone. I mean, in my own process, I'm not a very structured person and I prefer flexibility. And so I would write in chunks and I just did what worked for me. And knowing yourself is like very critical. And even though Dr. Ali Turco talked about her process, like, taking a little bit longer, she still finished in 3 semesters. And Vero had her vacation literally right at the moment of her defense, right? She scheduled her vacation and she was like, this is when I will be done. And she was done.
Vera, I did the same thing. I went to Jamaica. Like, I was like, no, the plane is leaving at this time. I must be defended by this time.
And let me add that it's so important that you back up your dissertation because I lost my suitcase with my computer. So make sure you back it up everywhere. I had to back it up everywhere because it can happen.
Yes.
It happened. And the other thing I wanted to say really quick is just be flexible. Like I remember my job is now very flexible. I have to meet a schedule. I have a federal job, so I have not a lot of flexibility. And I remember in the first semester, I took a week off before the deadline of chapter something because I was ballparking like, okay, I'm gonna get the feedback this week, so I'm gonna take this week off so I can work on the feedback and submit the draft. And one of my committee members got sick that week, so I couldn't get the feedback on time. Well, I was off at home, just not working on dissertation. So just be flexible because these things can happen. You are tied up with the timely feedback or how much other committee members are wiggling. So not everything depends on you.
Oh, just as an aside, total aside, I don't know how people are doing their interviews, but mine was on Zoom. And nobody told me until halfway about this nifty little feature on Zoom on transcribing. So that was a really cool find that Zoom has transcripts. But of course, you have to go in and for me, because I have an accent, I can clean them up and make sure that it's accurate. You review it. So some little things like that can save you a lot of time. So I found that to be helpful depending on what you're using for recording your interviews.
And Teams does now too.
Teams, yes.
So I want to thank you all. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for your knowledge. I really appreciate you all. Just this was wonderful. I hope everybody has gained some information and has gotten some support that they needed.